Hey friends, Padre Ryder coming to you via the virtual airwaves of YouTube. It's Halloween. It's a gorgeous day in the Crescent City, the Big Easy, New Orleans. A nice day to visit the cemeteries. Cemeteries. Why? Because it's Halloween? Well, yes, sort of. But just because our cemeteries are so unique, I thought I would show you what it's like to be buried in New Orleans. So we're going to turn into Greenwood Cemetery. What we've done is we've gone right past the first little turn for the second U-turn so that we can get into, we're going to pass that first one, there we go. Now we're going to U-turn so we can get into the cemetery, and only to be cut off, by a woman going the wrong direction. Roll Tide. She obviously wanted to see Padre put into the cemetery. So what we're going to do is follow her around so that we can get to a point where we can give her a dirty look. No, we're not going to do that. Here's the deal. So I've shot this footage today, and the microphone wasn't working. So I'm just going to give some voiceover to what we're seeing here. Now, what's going to be interesting about this is tomorrow, November 1st, is All Saints' Day, and the cemeteries in New Orleans are going to be packed with people. I mean packed. They're going to be bringing flowers. They're going to be bringing religious ornamentation to place on the graves. People are going to come by and tidy up the graves and clean them up for the season. It's kind of the annual day to make sure that Grandma and Grandpa's resting place is looking spiffy. All of that happens on All Saints' Day. In fact, the graveyards, the cemeteries, are going to be so packed on All Saints' Day in New Orleans. What's going to end up happening is there's going to be need for police officers to direct traffic in and out of the cemetery so that people don't get run over like I almost just did. The other thing, like in this cemetery here, you'll see that there are these cross sections, and I just zipped through that one because I could see. This is private property, so there's no stop signs or anything. So you just got to be real careful, particularly when you're on two wheels. Oh, look there. There is a stop sign. How about that? But not everywhere. So you do have to be pretty careful. Now, what you might notice about these New Orleans cemeteries is that all the graves are above ground, and there's very good reason for that. It has to do with water. Number one, New Orleans as a city is below sea level, so we're kind of shaped like a bowl. So we hold a lot of water. When it rains, think about, straight flat land, and all of a sudden there's a dip in the land that's bowl-shaped. Water's going to seek its level. It's going to go down to the lowest point, and it's just going to kind of stay there. So that's the problem we have with flooding in New Orleans. So we have to have some very unique drainage systems. Now, we also have something called a high water table. What that means is you don't have to dig very far into the ground before you hit water. And so because of that, we really have to have these graves that would have to be very shallow, or the combination of a high water table with a propensity for holding flood water or rainwater would cause caskets to float up, and that would not be a pretty sight. So these graves, as you can see, they're beautiful. They're built above ground. They're kind of walled in. Some of them are single, some are doubles or larger, and what you can do is, even though there's a double on the right, you can put more than just two even in a double, as long as the casket is made out of wood. Because what will happen over time, of course, is decomposition, and so they can go in and break up the casket in a reverent manner, of course, and make room for more folks as long as a certain amount of time has indeed passed by. So that's kind of a unique look at the cemeteries here. Now, All Saints Day, as I was mentioning, is a huge day. In fact, Halloween actually means Holy Eve, right? So this is the eve of a holy day. Back in the early days of the Christian church, as martyrs were being made, there was a day set aside in the church calendar to honor each of those quote-unquote saints who had laid down their life for the faith. And what happened by the 2nd century is there were far too many of those people than we had dates on the calendar in the church. So at some point in time, the day to commemorate all of these saints was decided to be one particular day. Now, November 1st didn't come around till much later. There were other times when this was commemorated. But nowadays, in the modern Christian calendar, November 1st is the day set aside for All Saints Day. And in New Orleans, because of the huge influence of the church, in particular the Roman Catholic Church, that it's just a part of our culture. You don't even have to be a Christian or even a believer to understand the importance of All Saints Day and visiting the graves of your loved ones and tidying them up and bringing flowers. In fact, it was in 1966 on November 1st that New Orleans received their charter from the National Football League, the NFL, to have a team, and that's why we're called the New Orleans Saints. A little bit of trivial history for you there on this hallowed eve, this beautiful Halloween. Now, we're going to be heading into some spooky weather later tonight. Hopefully all the rain will stay away until well after trick-or-treating time, but we are due for some bad weather, and hopefully that'll also be clearing up by early enough tomorrow for folks to be able to make it out to visit the cemeteries and such. One of the things I wanted to point out to you is these cemeteries obviously are very old. These roads are indeed well paved, but what you might notice on the corner of each of the roads, or not necessarily each corner, there's a little black thing that sits about, 2.5 feet high. Let's see if we can get a shot of one for you. And this just goes to show you how far back in age this goes. Those are actually posts for horses. So if you think about back in the day, the casket would have been brought into the cemetery in a horse-drawn carriage. This was long before we had motorized vehicles. And so you'd have to tie the horse up to something, and that's what those little black posts were for. They served as a post for tying up the horse. They served as kind of a bumper guard as well for the carriages and such that would come through. And even to this day, if there's a dignitary that might be being buried, you might still see a horse-drawn carriage carrying the casket here in New Orleans. Anyway, just an interesting, I thought, fun little video to show you on Halloween as we prepare for All Saints Day, a very important tradition here in New Orleans. You know, even some of the old German settlers, they came here as either Lutherans or German evangelicals, and they had their own day for doing this as well. They celebrated it on the last Sunday of the church year. So that's the Sunday before Advent begins. And that's usually that falls on the last Sunday of the month of November. Not always. Sometimes it can be the first Sunday in December. At any rate, they would call that Totenfest. Very similar sort of thing. You go to the cemetery, tidy up the graves. It's a day of remembering those who have passed. And in a lot of those churches where there's a German influence in New Orleans, they would still celebrate Totenfest, even in their Sunday service, as a time of remembering, particularly those who have passed in the previous church year, those who have gone home to be with the Lord in the previous church year. The church year, of course, starts the first Sunday of Advent. So that last Sunday of the church year would be Totenfest, and it's a time to memorialize those who have gone home to be with the Lord. Not unlike All Saints Day, of course. All Saints Day, again, originally for the martyrs, later for the capital S saints is a lot of influence, or a lot of emphasis placed on that. What I mean by capital S saints is those who have been formally canonized. And then November 2nd has kind of come along as All Souls Day, a chance to memorialize all the other little S saints, like Grandma and Grandpa and those sorts of things. It all kind of gets I don't know, mixed in as a gumbo on All Saints Day here in New Orleans. But November is just one of those months, it seems, that folks will remember the dearly departed. And as we wrap up October, I'm hoping that you enjoyed this little visit with me and a little bit of a tour of seeing what our cemeteries look like and how they're a little bit unique down here in New Orleans. And I know my opening says that meeting people where they are on the road of life, and that's an odd thing for this particular video, but I don't think it's all that odd because, that's the thing as a Christian that we can hold on to, is that once you leave this earthly temporary tent, as Paul would refer to it in the epistles, your life actually continues. In fact, the saints who are up in heaven are more alive than any of us here on earth, and that's really good news. Hey, Padre Rider, thanks for riding along with me today. Wishing you on this Halloween, as we head into November and All Saints Day and All Souls Day and Totenfest and Thanksgiving and all those wonderful celebrations that are to come, wishing you and yours God's peace, grace, and blessings.